The garage had no name anymore. The sign had blown off in the last storm season, and Mara Voss hadn't bothered replacing it. Out here, on the edge of the veldt margin where the red dust of Kareth IV met the crumbling prefab architecture of a settlement that the Colonial Transit Authority had half-heartedly approved and entirely forgotten, a name on a sign wouldn't bring more customers anyway. Customers came because their crawlers broke down on the long red flats, and there was nowhere else for 300 kilometers in any direction. They came because the dust got into everything: filters, axle joints, fuel converters. And because Mara Voss was the only person within 300 kilometers who knew how to get it back out again. She was under the belly of a cargo hauler when the first one arrived. She heard the footsteps first. 2 sets of them, small and uneven, the way children walk when they're trying to be quiet but don't entirely understand how. She slid out from under the hauler on her board, wiping her hands on the front of her coveralls, squinting up into the flat white glare of the midday sun. They were alien. That much was obvious immediately, though on Kareth IV this was less remarkable than it would have been anywhere closer to the core worlds. The settlement sat inside a neutral commerce zone, which meant half a dozen species cycled through on any given season. These 2 were Velharan. She recognized the elongated cranial ridges, the secondary eyelids that flickered sideways when they blinked, the silver-gray skin with its faint bioluminescent undertone that pulsed very faintly when they were excited or afraid. They were small. The taller one came up to Mara's chest. The shorter one barely cleared her hip. The taller one was holding something out toward her with both hands, the way you hold an injured animal. It was a toy. Some kind of mechanical bird, Velharan construction, articulated wings, and a tiny chest cavity that was probably supposed to glow when it sang. The chest cavity was dark. One wing was bent at an angle that suggested impact with something hard. The shorter child held a small-wheeled vehicle. Several of its wheels were missing. The remaining one spun freely in the wrong direction. Mara looked at the toys. She looked at the children. The taller one said something in Velharan that her translator implant rendered as approximately, "The singing thing is broken. The roll thing is broken also. Can you fix them?" She should have sent them away. She had a cargo hauler that needed 3 more hours of work, a backlog of engine diagnostics she'd been putting off for a week, and a departure date she'd already pushed back twice. She'd been telling herself she was leaving Kareth IV for 7 months. She had a contract lined up on one of the Meridian stations, proper facilities, steady work, a bed that didn't vibrate when the wind came off the flats at night. She had everything lined up. She just kept not going. She took the mechanical bird from the taller child's hands and turned it over slowly, feeling the weight of it, pressing gently on the wing joint. "Sit down," she said, and jerked her chin toward the 2 low crates she kept outside the garage bay for exactly this purpose. She didn't know why she kept them there. She'd inherited them from the previous owner, a Terran man named Oso who'd run the garage for 20 years before retiring to somewhere cooler. He'd kept the crates outside so his dog had somewhere to sit while he worked. Mara had no dog, but she'd kept the crates. The children sat. She went inside for her fine tools. It took her 40 minutes to fix the bird. The wing joint had sheared at a stress point where the original manufacturer had used a cheap alloy rather than the reinforced composite the design called for. She'd seen it before in Velharan children's toys. A corner cut somewhere up the supply chain that didn't matter until it did. She replaced the joint with a piece of composite she cannibalized from a broken nav mount she'd been keeping for parts. She replaced the bioluminescent cell in the chest cavity with a spare she happened to have because, 3 years ago, a Velharan trader had paid her in components rather than credits, and she'd never used all of them. When she set the bird down on the crate and pressed its activation point, it spread its wings, turned its tiny head toward the sky, and sang 4 rising notes in a key that she had no name for. The shorter child made a sound Mara's translator didn't catch, something below the register of formal language, something that was purely reflex. Both children stared at the bird as it sang. The wheeled vehicle took her another 20 minutes. 3 of the missing wheels had rolled under the workbench inside. The children must have been in the garage before she noticed them, though she couldn't figure out how they'd gotten past her, and she reattached them with new fasteners. The direction fault turned out to be a reverse drive coupling, a manufacturing error she fixed in 30 seconds with a quarter turn of her smallest wrench. She set it on the ground. It rolled straight and fast until it hit the leg of her workbench and stopped. The children looked at her. The taller one said something. "What do I owe you?" her translator said. "Nothing," Mara said. "Go home before the afternoon wind picks up." She went back under the cargo hauler. She didn't think about them again until evening, when she was eating reconstituted rice from the pot on her camp stove, and realized the garage was very quiet. The normal settlement sounds, the distant percussion of the processing plant, the occasional crawler engine, the wind moving through the gap between her garage and the storage unit next door, all of it was there, but she kept feeling the absence of something else, the way a room feels after children have left it. She ate her rice. She watched the sun go down over the red flats and turn everything the color of old copper. She went to bed. They came back the next morning with more things. Not just the 2 of them this time. 4 children now, ranging in age from the small, round-faced one she'd seen yesterday to what looked like a young adolescent with the beginning of the adult cranial ridges forming along the crown of the skull. They brought broken things. A communicator whose display had cracked, a data tablet with a fried processing core, another toy, this one a small, articulated humanoid figure, Velharan craftsmanship again but higher quality than the bird, with fine detail work on the facial features that suggested it had been made by an artist rather than a factory. She fixed them. It took most of the morning. On the 3rd day there were 6 children. One of them brought a broken thing she'd never seen before, a small sphere, palm-sized, made of a material she couldn't immediately identify, with a series of interlocking surface panels that should apparently open and close in sequence but were jammed. She turned it over in her hands for a long time. The material was unlike anything in her experience. Not a metal, not a polymer, not any composite she'd worked with, and she'd worked with most of them. It had a faint warmth to it, not the warmth of something recently handled but an internal warmth, like something with a very slow metabolism. She looked up at the child who'd brought it. This one was different from the others. Older, probably, or just more composed. The bioluminescent undertone in its skin pulsed steadily, unhurried, in a pattern she'd started recognizing as the Velharan version of calm. "What is this?" she asked. The child said something her translator struggled with, then simplified to, "A puzzle keeper. It belonged to our parent. Your parent's puzzle keeper is broken." "Yes." "You want me to fix it?" "Yes." Mara set the sphere down carefully on her cleanest cloth. "This might take a while," she said. "Go sit with the others." She spent 2 hours on the puzzle keeper. She had to teach herself how the locking mechanism worked before she could fix it, tracing the sequence logic manually, panel by panel, building a mental model of how the thing was supposed to move before she could understand why it wasn't moving. When she finally got it open, she found, nested inside, a small data crystal of a type she recognized as high-security Velharan encoding. She closed the sphere back up without touching the crystal. Whatever was inside was not her business. When it opened smoothly and the panels cycled through their sequence in the correct order, the older child took it from her hands and held it against its chest for a moment, eyes closed. "You understand objects," the child said, not a compliment exactly, more like a statement of fact, an observation. "It's what I do," Mara said. She went back to the cargo hauler. She was almost done with it anyway. She could finish today, collect her payment, close up the garage, and start loading her kit for the journey to the transit station. She had made this plan before, but she was making it again, and this time it felt more real. At noon, the children brought her lunch. She didn't know where it came from, proper food, not reconstituted anything. A layered grain dish she'd had once before at a Velharan food stall in one of the larger settlement markets, and still thought about. They set it on the clean cloth beside her tools without saying anything and went back to their crates. She ate it. It was better than she remembered. She did not ask where it came from. She had the feeling that asking would change something, and she didn't want anything changed yet. The cargo hauler's owner came to collect it that afternoon. He paid her without complaint. He was one of the good ones, a long-haul trader named Petros who'd been using her garage for 2 years and never once tried to argue about the rate. He looked at the children sitting on the crates outside, while Mara processed his payment. "Whose kids?" he said. "Don't know," she said. "They've been here all day." 3 days. Petros looked at her with an expression she recognized as the look people give you when they think you've already figured something out but don't want to say so. "Right," he said. "Safe running, Voss." She watched his crawler raise its own dust trail heading south and then turned back to the children. "Where do you sleep?" she asked. The older child pointed east, toward the settlement's residential cluster. "We have accommodation," it said. "Who's with you?" "Parents, a guardian." A pause. The children exchanged glances in the way children do when they're all silently agreeing on which version of the truth to tell. "We have attendants," the older child said finally. "Do your attendants know where you are?" Another pause, shorter this time. "They know we are safe." It was not the same thing as answering the question she'd asked, and they all knew it. But Mara let it go. She'd been a child herself once, in a settlement not entirely unlike this one, on a different marginal world with different colored dust. She understood the value of technically accurate answers. The next morning, she woke to find the communication network was down. This happened sometimes on Kareth IV. The relay infrastructure was old and underfunded, and a strong enough wind event could knock out a transmitter array for hours. She ran a diagnostic on her own systems, confirmed it wasn't her equipment, and went outside to check the sky. The sky to the west was the color of old brick, not a cloud, a wall. A dust front moving in off the deep flats, the kind that happened twice a season, and lasted anywhere from 6 hours to 3 days, and made the entire Velt margin into something that was mostly just brown chaos with occasional solid objects in it. She went back inside and started sealing her garage. The children arrived before she finished. All 6 of them, plus 2 she hadn't seen before, moving quickly through the settlement's lanes with the unhurried efficiency of people who know exactly where they're going. They came straight to her garage. "The storm," the older child said. "I can see that," Mara said. "Your accommodation, is it sealed?" "The building has no storm shutters," the older child said. "The attendants are." A pause, a glance between children, addressing another situation. Another situation. She looked at 8 alien children in various sizes standing in the lane outside her garage, while a dust front the size of a small continent bore down on them from the west. "Inside," she said. She finished sealing the garage with the children helping. They were good workers. They followed instructions without needing them repeated and figured out mechanical processes quickly. She showed the older child how to crank the manual shutters on the high windows once, and the child did all 4 of the remaining windows without her supervision. The 2 youngest sorted her tool wall by size without being asked, apparently because it seemed like the obvious thing to do. When the storm hit, it hit like something with intention. The sound was a low, sustained roar that she felt in the floor as much as she heard it through the walls. The lights on the battery backup flickered once and held. Dust found every gap she'd missed in the ceiling and crept along the floor in thin red lines. She fed the children from her stores. She had enough. She'd been planning to leave soon, so she hadn't been restocking, but she had enough for now. She made the layered grain dish herself, from the dry ingredients she kept in the sealed pantry cabinet, badly and without the spices she didn't have, and the children ate it politely without complaint. The two youngest fell asleep on her salvage pile, curled together in a space between a disassembled engine block and a rack of sorted cable, entirely comfortable with their surroundings, the way children are when they're genuinely exhausted. The older child sat with her at her workbench, while the storm ran its noise outside. "You fix things," the older child said, not a question this time, still a statement but different. Like it was the beginning of a longer sentence, and the child was deciding whether to say the rest. "Yes," Mara said. "Our parent," the child started again. "There is something in our parent's possession that has broken, something important. No one has been able to fix it. We were told it could not be fixed." Mara set down the component she'd been cleaning. "What kind of something?" "A navigation instrument, very old. It belonged to our parent's parent's parent." The child pulled the puzzle keeper from its carrying pouch and turned it in its hands. "It was made before standardization. No one makes the components it requires anymore. The technicians of the Royal Fleet said." The child stopped again. Mara looked at it steadily. "The Royal Fleet," she said. The child looked back at her with the perfectly even expression of someone who has just said more than they meant to. "Tell me about the navigation instrument," Mara said. It took the storm 19 hours to pass. During those 19 hours, Mara Voss learned the following things: that the 8 children in her garage were not simply the children of Velharan traders passing through a neutral commerce zone. That the Velharan sovereignty, which governed approximately 37 inhabited systems in the Spinward Arm and was notable primarily for its extreme formality, its complex inheritance laws, and its deeply held cultural conviction that the character of a leader could be read in how they treated those from whom they had nothing to gain, had sent its sovereign's children to Kareth IV as part of a diplomatic passage. That the diplomatic passage had experienced complications she didn't ask about, and the children's attendants had experienced a different set of complications she also didn't ask about. That the children had been spending their afternoons at her garage not because they were bored or lost, but because the older child, whose name she would later learn but in these hours still didn't know, had seen her from a distance on the first day, fixing a broken thing for a stranger without being asked, and had made a decision. She also learned that the navigation instrument they were describing was, in all the ways that mattered mechanically, a kind of puzzle. "Bring it to me," she said. "It is not here," the older child said. "After the storm." The child looked at her with those steady eyes that pulsed their calm, slow light. "You think you can fix it?" "I think I'd like to look at it," Mara said. "I have a rule. I don't tell people I can fix something until I've looked at it." "The Royal Fleet technicians." "I'm not a Royal Fleet technician," Mara said. "I'm a person in a garage on the edge of nowhere who fixes things. Sometimes that's different." After the storm, the settlement looked like it had been repainted by someone who only had one color. Everything was coated in the same fine red grit. Mara spent an hour clearing her immediate work area with her compressed air line, while the children helped or watched depending on their age and energy levels. The attendants arrived 2 hours after the storm cleared. There were 4 of them, adult Velharan in the kind of understated formal clothing that Mara associated with serious professional contexts, and they stood in the lane outside the garage with expressions that suggested they had experienced a very stressful 19 hours and were now attempting to process the situation with appropriate decorum. They spoke in low, rapid Velharan to the older child. The older child spoke back, calm and deliberate. Then one of the attendants stepped forward and addressed Mara. Her translator worked hard and produced. "The children of the sovereign were in your care during the storm event. We express formal gratitude on behalf of the sovereignty." They were good company, Mara said. No trouble at all. The attendant looked at her with an expression she couldn't read. Is there anything you require, compensation or? They mentioned a navigation instrument, Mara said. I'd like to look at it. A pause. The attendants exchanged glances. The older child, she would think of the child that way for a while longer. The older child, the one with the puzzle keeper, stood very still and said nothing, which she was already learning to read as a particular kind of waiting. The navigation instrument is located on the diplomatic vessel, the attendant said carefully. In orbit. Then I'll need a ride up, Mara said. She said it the way she said most things, evenly, without drama, as a statement of fact and not a request. The way you say, hand me that wrench. The silence that followed was interesting. She could feel something being recalculated in the group of adults in front of her, some assessment being revised. That can be arranged, the attendant said. She packed her fine tools. She packed the unmarked components she kept for the things she'd never seen before but knew she'd find a use for eventually. She locked the garage, because you always lock up even when you're leaving forever, and stood for a moment in the lane looking at the building that had no name on it and thought about Oso, who had kept the crates for his dog. She kept the crates because she had kept them. That was the whole reason. Because they were there, and you kept things that were there, and sometimes the things you kept became reasons. The shuttle was waiting at the edge of the settlement's landing pad, small and elegant in the way that Velharan engineering tended toward elegance. Nothing wasted, nothing decorative, but everything fitted to a purpose so precisely that the precision itself became its own kind of beauty. The 8 children filed aboard with a practiced orderliness that was clearly trained behavior, the 2 youngest pausing on the ramp to look back at Mara with an expression she couldn't entirely translate. Something in the category of making sure you're actually following. She followed. The diplomatic vessel in orbit was large enough that Mara's first impression was architectural rather than nautical. It felt like a building, something rooted, with corridors that had a sense of history and use worn into them. The children scattered into its interior with the ease of people returning home after a trip, and the attendants conducted her through the formal admission process with a courtesy that was genuine but careful. The way courtesy always is when you're not quite sure what category someone falls into. The navigation instrument was in a sealed chamber near the ship's core. She understood why they'd called it irreparable before she even opened the housing. The instrument was old in the way that very few things are old, not worn, not damaged by time, but evolved into a form that simply no longer had living context. It operated on principles that had been superseded, in a physical substrate that no one had sourced for 3 generations, with a calibration system that assumed a reference point in space that no longer existed because the star it had been calibrated to had gone variable 50 years ago, and was now throwing false readings. Mara sat with it for 6 hours. The attendants brought her food and did not rush her. The children checked in at intervals, the younger ones peering around the chamber doorframe in the way of children who have been told to leave an adult alone, but find themselves constitutionally incapable of it. She didn't chase them away. She liked knowing they were there. The navigation instrument had been declared irreparable because the people who'd examined it had approached it as a technical problem. They had looked for components to replace and found none. They had looked for calibration references to substitute and found them obsolete. They had looked, in short, for the existing solution and not found one, and had concluded from this that there was no solution. Mara did not think about solutions. She thought about what the instrument was trying to do. It was trying to find a fixed point. That was its whole purpose. Everything it had been built to accomplish was in service of establishing a position relative to something that did not move. The star it had been calibrated to was not useful anymore, but the instrument's underlying desire, if a machine could be said to have desires, and she'd spent enough time with machines to think that maybe something like desire was not entirely the wrong word, was not for that star specifically. It was for a fixed point. Any fixed point. Something that did not move. She spent 2 hours recalibrating the instrument's reference matrix to use a different fixed point. Not a star. Something older and more stable, a specific resonance in the substrate of space itself, a background constant that had been in the navigation literature for 40 years, but that most navigators ignored because it was too slow and too subtle to be useful for the kind of fast transit navigation that modern ships used. Useful, however, for an ancient instrument that had never been built for speed, built for certainty instead. When she powered the instrument up and it hummed to life, and its display bloomed with the quiet, steady orientation data of a machine that finally knew where it was, she felt something she didn't have a precise name for. Not pride. Pride was about yourself. This was something more like the feeling when you clear a blocked pipe and the water runs. The relief of the right thing happening. She sat there for a while after that, listening to it hum. The older child appeared in the doorway, came in without asking, which felt right, stood beside Mara and looked at the instrument's display. "It's working," the child said. "Yes." "How?" Mara thought about how to explain it. It needed a new fixed point, she said. It was looking for something that had moved. I gave it something that doesn't move. There's always something that doesn't move if you look past the things that do. The child was quiet for a while. Outside the sealed chamber, somewhere in the ship's interior, Mara could hear the small sounds of a ship that was occupied. Ventilation, distant voices, the almost imperceptible vibration of systems doing their work. "You didn't know who we were," the child said. "No. When you fixed the toys, when you gave us shelter in the storm, you didn't know." "No," Mara agreed. "You would have done it anyway." She considered this. She had been considering it for most of the last 6 hours, actually, in the background of her attention while the majority of her mind worked on the navigation problem, whether it mattered, whether knowing would have changed anything. "Yes," she said, "I think I would have." The child reached into its carrying pouch and brought out the puzzle keeper, turned it in its hands once, the panels cycling open and closed in their sequence, smooth and correct, then held it out to Mara. She looked at it. "That was your parents." "Our parent has many things," the child said. "You gave us your time, 3 days, the storm, now this." A pause. The bioluminescent undertone in the child's skin pulsed slowly. "In our culture, there is a word for the debt created when someone gives you the thing you did not know you needed. I don't know if it translates." "It doesn't have to translate," Mara said. She didn't take the puzzle keeper. She closed the child's fingers around it gently, the way you set a bird back down after checking its wing. "Keep it," she said. "Some things are for keeping." She was met, on her way out of the chamber, by the senior attendant and 2 others she hadn't seen before. These 2 were different, older, she thought, or at least carrying themselves with a weight that came from long service to something significant. Their clothing was the same understated formal style, but better made. Their eyes were the same. "Mara Voss," the senior attendant said, "the sovereign requests the honor of your presence." She had known, somewhere in the back of her mind, that something like this was coming. She had known it the way you know when a machine is about to finish its cycle, not from watching it, but from the sounds it makes and what those sounds mean. "All right," she said. The sovereign of the Velharan was not what she expected, which she supposed was the point of a sovereign. The person who met her in the diplomatic vessel's formal reception chamber was older than she'd imagined, with the deep cranial ridges of an adult who had lived long enough to let time have its opinion of them, and eyes that had the look of someone who had spent many years making decisions and understanding the weight of each one. The children were there, all 8 of them, arranged in a way that was clearly formal and meaningful in ways she didn't have the cultural vocabulary to fully read. The older child stood closest to the sovereign, and when Mara came in, the sovereign's eyes moved to the older child first and then to Mara, and something passed between the three of them that she felt without understanding. The sovereign spoke for a long time. Her translator worked hard and gave her something close to the following. My children travel without their status declared because I believe that a person who has been raised knowing they will rule must learn who they are before others decide who they are. The character of a person is most clearly visible when they believe nothing is watching and nothing is owed. We have traveled to many worlds. My children have met many people. They have brought me reports of each one. I have read their reports of you. Mara stood with her hands at her sides, in the same posture she stood in when she was watching something power up for the first time, not tense, but paying attention. They said you fix things, the sovereign said, not to make profit though you need to. Not to earn favor though you did. They said you fix things because a broken thing in your hands is a problem and you solve problems. That is what they said. A pause. My attendants tell me you have also repaired the navigation instrument in 6 hours. Alone. It needed a fixed point, Mara said. The sovereign looked at her for a long moment with those heavy, steady eyes. So do most things, the sovereign said. So do most things, Mara Voss. What was offered to her in the next hour was substantial. She was told this plainly, without embellishment, in the practical tone of someone who did not think much of embellishment. A position, if she wanted it, as head engineer of the Velharan diplomatic fleet, the ships that moved the sovereignty's people through the galaxy and that broke down, inevitably, in the places furthest from support. A team, resources, work that mattered in the sense that the machines she fixed would carry important people to important places where important decisions were made. Not anonymity, not the clean silence of a garage at the edge of a world no one remembered, but the other thing. The thing she hadn't thought she wanted. She asked for a night to think. She spent the night in a cabin the attendants assigned her, which was comfortable in the way of a ship that was made for long journeys, and understood that people on long journeys need to rest well. She lay on her back in the dark and thought about Kareth IV, the red dust, the crates, the way the children had sorted her tool wall by size without being asked. She thought about Oso and his dog, and the 20 years he'd run the garage and the somewhere cooler he'd gone when it was done. She thought about the fixed point, about how the instrument hadn't needed anything new to be created or added. It had only needed someone to look past the thing that had moved and find the thing that hadn't. It was always there. You just had to know to look. In the morning, she gave her answer. What she carried back to Kareth IV with her, she had asked to go back first and they had agreed, and a shuttle had come down, was not much different from what she'd carried up. Her tools, her instincts. The understanding of how to find a fixed point when everything else has moved. She unlocked the garage, let in the morning light, which was the same color it always was, red and flat and warm. She put on the camp stove and made coffee that was not as good as the food the children had brought her. She sat on one of the crates outside and drank it in the early quiet. The cargo she was taking with her when she left in 3 days included one item she hadn't had before, a sealed data package with the technical schematics of every vessel in the Velharan diplomatic fleet, cross-referenced with a list of the parts she'd need to order and the tools she'd need to acquire. Reading material, the kind you studied before starting a new job. There was also a small component she hadn't expected, a spare bioluminescent cell, Velharan manufacture, of the type she'd used to repair the mechanical bird. Left in her tool bag sometime during the storm, she thought, by a small hand that had understood what it meant to leave something for someone. A currency she didn't have a name for. She finished her coffee. She looked at the empty lane, the dust already beginning to settle from whatever wind had moved it overnight, the red planet going about its ordinary morning. She thought about the navigation instrument, humming in the dark of the diplomatic vessel, pointing steadily at a fixed point that had always been there. She went inside and got to work. The calls started coming 3 weeks after she boarded the fleet ship Sovereign's Margin. Small calls first, a conduit relay on Deck 7 running intermittently, a fuel converter on the secondary shuttle showing anomalous readings. She fixed them. She fixed a heating system in the crew quarters that had been managed with workarounds for 6 months, and a navigation sensor array that 3 previous technicians had flagged as functioning but degraded. She learned the ship the way she'd always learned machines, by listening to them before she touched them, by understanding what they wanted to do before she told them what to do. The older child came to find her in the engine spaces on the 4th day, just to look apparently, to watch her work. "You came," the child said. "I came," Mara agreed. She was fitting a new component into a drive housing, her attention divided precisely between the work and the conversation in the way she'd learned to divide it. "Why?" She considered this while she seated the component and tested the fit. "Because there's more to fix here," she said, "and because someone showed me that fixing things is the same wherever you are. It doesn't matter if the machine is in a garage on a nowhere world or in a ship that goes between the stars." She looked up. "A broken thing is a broken thing. You fix it." The child stood in the door of the engine space with that steady bioluminescent pulse, the slow light that meant calm. "Our culture has a saying," the child said. "The one who mends what is broken inherits what endures." Mara looked at the child, looked at the ship around them, the years of it, the use worn into it, the 10,000 components doing their small, essential work, the hum of a machine that knew where it was. "That's a good saying," she said. She turned back to her work. Outside the ship, the galaxy ran its courses. Stars held their positions. In the dark between them, in the gaps and the distances that looked like nothing from a distance and were full of everything up close, there were machines that broke down and people stranded by them and the long call of a problem waiting to be solved. She would find them. She was good at finding them. She was good at the thing that looked like nothing from a distance. The quiet attention, the patient hands, the willingness to stay with something until she understood it. Not for what it would bring her. Because it was there. Because it was broken. Because a broken thing, turned over slowly in understanding hands, is always only a fixed point away from becoming whole. The drive housing seated correctly. The system powered up without fault. She listened to it run for a full minute before she moved to the next task. The ship hummed around her like something satisfied. She was already thinking about the next one. The Sovereign's Margin was 3 weeks out from its next diplomatic stop when Mara found the resonance fault. She hadn't been looking for it. She'd been running routine diagnostics on the tertiary drive array, a task she'd scheduled herself because no one had done a proper baseline check on the tertiary array since the ship's last dry dock refit 14 months ago, and machines that aren't checked develop habits you don't know about until those habits become problems. She was halfway through the diagnostic sequence when she saw it, a vibration pattern in the 3rd resonance chamber that didn't belong. Small, stable. Something most diagnostics would flag as within acceptable variance and skip past. She didn't skip past it. She flagged it in her report log, pulled the technical schematic for that section of the drive system, and traced the pattern back to its source. It took her most of an afternoon. The source was a microfracture in one of the chamber's field emitters, invisible to standard scans, invisible to the naked eye, but present in the vibration data if you knew what listening felt like. The field emitter, if it failed during transit at speed, would have taken the drive chamber with it. The drive chamber would have taken the adjacent fuel management system. The cascade from there was a path she didn't need to finish calculating. She ordered the parts through the ship's supply requisition system and scheduled the repair. She did not make a report about what the failure would have meant. She noted the fault, its source, its fix, and the parts ordered. She filed it under routine maintenance. 3 days later, the chief attendant found her in the engineering bay, which was becoming a predictable occurrence. The chief attendant was named Velsorin. She'd learned names by now, the way you learn names when people are around you long enough, and had the particular quality of someone who had spent decades in service to consequential people and developed a corresponding attentiveness to small things. Velsorin stood in the doorway of the engineering bay with an expression Mara was learning to read as one of several things, and today it was. There is something I need to say directly. I reviewed your maintenance log, Velsorin said. It's all in the report, Mara said. She didn't stop what she was doing. She was recalibrating the newly replaced field emitter, a precise task that benefited from uninterrupted attention. The fault you identified, Velsorin said. I showed it to the previous engineering lead's records. He ran a diagnostic on that section 4 months ago. I saw that in the records, Mara said. He marked it within acceptable variance. He wasn't wrong, Mara said. It was within acceptable variance at that time. Things change. Velsorin was quiet for a moment. You understand what you prevented. Mara set down her calibration tool, turned on her stool, and looked at the chief attendant directly. I understand what would have happened, she said. Yes. The Sovereign is aboard this ship. I know. Her children are aboard this ship. I know that too, Mara said. Velsorin looked at her for a moment, not with suspicion, nothing like that, but with the look of someone revising a model, updating something. You filed it as routine maintenance, the attendant said. It was routine maintenance, Mara said. Catching it before it became a problem is the whole point of routine maintenance. If I'd filed a report for every fault I've found on this ship that could have been serious if left unfound, I'd spend half my time filing reports. The job is finding them early. I found it early. Another silence. Outside the engineering bay, the sounds of the ship, the regular circulation of the life support system, someone in the corridor speaking in a low voice, the faint background harmonic of the drive running clean. The previous engineering lead was on this ship for 6 years, Velsorin said finally. I know, Mara said. He was well regarded. I'm sure he was, Mara said. He kept good records. His records made my job easier. I'm not criticizing his work. I'm just here now, and I'm going to do it the way I know how to do it. She picked up the calibration tool and turned back to the emitter. She heard Velsorin leave. She heard the footsteps pause in the corridor, then continue. She thought about the previous engineering lead's 6 years, and the 4-month-old diagnostic, and the line between within acceptable variance and not quite, and how that line was different for everyone, and the difference was not ability but attention. She finished the calibration. She ran the verification sequence. The emitter came back clean on all parameters. She moved to the next item on her list. On the 21st day of the voyage, the older child found her in the engineering bay again. This was normal now, the visits. The child, Mara, had been given permission to know the name, but maintained her private habit of the older child for reasons she hadn't examined too closely. Came in the evenings, after the formal schedules of a sovereign's Heirs day were done, and sat on the metal stool by the secondary tool locker and watched her work or talked or sometimes just existed in the quiet. Tonight the child was quiet for a long while before speaking. Do you miss it? The child said. Kareth IV. The garage. Mara thought about this honestly. She owed the child honesty. She felt this clearly, not as an obligation but as a fact. Sometimes, she said, not the place, the scale of it maybe. There it was always just me and the problem, no one else's stakes. Here there are stakes, the child said. Here there are stakes, Mara agreed. It's different, I'm still getting used to it. Do you regret coming? She stopped what she was doing, which she didn't do for many things, and looked at the child directly. The bioluminescent undertone pulsed its slow, calm rhythm. The eyes' secondary lids half closed in what she'd learned meant ease, comfort, the absence of pretense, were steady on her face. "No," she said, "I don't regret it. Because of what you can fix here. Because of who I met," she said. "Because of 8 children who sorted my tools and slept in my salvage pile and brought me food I didn't ask for." She paused. "Because a child gave me their parents' puzzle keeper, and I gave it back, and neither of us had to say what that meant." The child looked at her for a long time. The ship moved through the dark between stars, as it always did, as it would continue to do. "In our culture," the older child said, "the heir is taught that leadership is not the giving of orders, it is the holding of things. You hold the weight of decisions. You hold the expectations. You hold the fear of the people who look to you so they do not have to carry it themselves." A pause. "My parent says the hardest part is not the weight, it is knowing who to trust with it." Mara listened. "I want to tell you something," the child said. "I found you because I watched you fix a crawler engine for a trader who had already paid you, and the fix took you 1 hour, and you didn't tell him you were doing it. And when he came back and the engine ran differently, better, he didn't know why. I watched you not tell him, and I thought that is someone who fixes things for the reason fixing should happen, not for the credit." "He paid me," Mara said, "fairly. The engine still had a problem, it was a short job, it would have come back." "You could have let it come back," the child said. She had no answer for that. She turned it over in her mind the way she turned unfamiliar components, looking for the shape of it. "I could have," she admitted. "My parent says that you can know a person's character in the decisions they make when no one is watching and nothing is owed," the child said. "I watched you when nothing was owed. I went back and told the others what I had seen. We brought you our broken things not only because they were broken, but because we wanted to know if you would be the same up close." "Were you satisfied?" Mara asked. She said it lightly, not defensively. She was genuinely curious. "More than satisfied," the older child said. "We went home and told our parent about the woman in the garage who fixed things and didn't say why. My parent asked us to describe you. We described your hands. My parent said, 'Bring me the navigation instrument.'" The navigation instrument, the thing declared irreparable. The 6 hours alone in the sealed chamber, tracing the logic of a machine that was looking for something that had moved. "Your parent knew I was coming," Mara said. "My parent hoped you were coming," the child said. "There is a difference. My parent has met many technicians, many skilled people. My parent has not met many people who look past the thing that has moved to find the thing that has not." The ship ran its deep harmonic through the deck plates and the walls and the bones of everyone aboard. Mara felt it the way she always felt it now, as something she knew, something she'd learned the way you learn a person's particular way of moving. She knew this ship now. She knew its rhythms and its tendencies and the places it wanted to be stubborn and the places it wanted to cooperate. "I have a question," she said. "Yes." "The puzzle keeper, the data crystal inside it," she paused. "You never told me what it contained." The child was quiet for a moment, the slow pulse of the bioluminescence. "A list," the child said, "of the people our parent trusts with the weight." Mara absorbed this. "I see," she said. "It is a short list," the child said. She looked at her hands, the grease lines in the knuckle creases that soap never entirely reached. The hands of someone who worked on things that mattered without advertising that they did. The hands that had held a broken bird and made it sing. She thought about the fix point, about what didn't move when everything else did. About the background constant that was always there in the data if you knew what to look for, if you were willing to look past the noise of the things that changed. She thought about 8 children who had sorted her tools by size without being asked. She thought about the crates outside the garage with no name, the crates that had become reasons. "Tell me more about the list," she said. The older child sat on the metal stool by the secondary tool locker and talked for a long time, and Mara listened the way she listened to machines, with full attention, missing nothing, asking her questions at the right moments, and understanding that some things only tell you what they are if you are patient enough and quiet enough and present enough to hear them. Outside the ship, the stars held their positions, the fixed points, the things that did not move. Inside it, something was being trusted to the right hands. The ship hummed on. There is a thing that happens in engineering spaces that happens nowhere else on a ship. It is not dramatic. It has no announcement. It begins as a sound, or sometimes as the absence of a sound, which is its own kind of announcement, and it requires a certain quality of attention to catch before it becomes something worse. Mara had been catching these things her whole professional life, in garages and repair bays and utility crawlers, and now aboard a diplomatic vessel carrying a sovereign and 8 royal heirs through the interstellar dark, and she had learned that the catching was not the hard part. The hard part was the moment before the catching, the moment when the sound was still ambiguous, still within the noise floor of a busy ship, still possible to dismiss. The moment when a reasonable person might log it as within acceptable variance and move on. She had stopped being that person a long time ago. She couldn't say exactly when. She thought it might have been the first time she'd fixed something that didn't need to be fixed yet and been right about it. The first time a machine had taught her that the difference between a fault you catch and a fault that catches you is entirely a matter of when you stop listening. She listened. She was listening on the 31st day of the voyage when the navigation array began speaking to her in the language of small wrongness, a microsecond lag in the course correction response that should have been instantaneous, a number that was correct but arrived a beat late, the way a tired person answers a question they know the answer to. She ran her diagnostic. She found the source in 6 minutes, which was satisfying in a different way from the big finds. The big finds, the field emitter, the resonance fault, carried their own weight. The small finds were satisfying the way a well-fitted component is satisfying, the way a smoothly turned bolt is satisfying, because it was right, because the machine would work better now, because the lag would not become a problem. Velsoren stopped making remarks about her maintenance logs. The children stopped asking permission before visiting the engineering bay. The sovereign sent for her on the 35th day. Not formally, not through the chief attendant with the careful language of official request, a message through the ship's internal comm system from the sovereign personally, in the matter-of-fact tone she was beginning to associate with Velharan communication at its most genuine, stripped of formality, because formality in this context would have meant less. Mara Voss, if you have a moment this evening, no hurry. She had a moment. She finished what she was working on first, because she always finished what she was working on first. The sovereign's working chamber was not the formal reception room. It was smaller, practical, with the look of a space that was genuinely used, tables with work surfaces, documents and data displays visible, the kind of controlled disorder that belongs to someone who thinks on their feet. The sovereign was standing when Mara came in, looking at a star chart on a display panel. She didn't change her posture when Mara entered. She just said, "Sit down, please," the way you say it to someone you intend to have an actual conversation with. Mara sat. The sovereign turned from the chart and sat across from her, and looked at her in the direct, unhurried way of someone who had long since stopped having conversations they didn't mean to have. "My children talk about you," the sovereign said. "They visit me in the engineering bay," Mara said. "I hope it hasn't been an imposition." "It has been a revelation," the sovereign said, with a directness that carried no sentiment and required none. "You should understand something. My children are well-educated, well-traveled, well-attended. They have met diplomats, admirals, scholars, artists. They don't visit the engineering bays of people they find unremarkable." Mara thought about what to say to this and settled on, "I'm glad they feel comfortable there." "My oldest tells me you fix things because fixing them is the correct response to something being broken," the sovereign said. "Not for reward, not for recognition. As a matter of, I think the word that was used was correctness." That's approximately right, Mara said. That is not a common motivation, the sovereign said. I have met many skilled people in my time. Most of them are skilled for reasons that involve what their skill brings them. This is not a criticism. It is appropriate that skill is rewarded and the expectation of reward is a reasonable motivation. But it produces a particular kind of person. A pause. You are a different kind of person. I'm a mechanic, Mara said. Yes, the sovereign said, with something that was almost warmth in its precision. You are precisely a mechanic. You are a person who, when presented with a broken thing, fixes it, without calculating what the fixing will cost or earn, without establishing whether the broken thing belongs to someone important or unimportant, without deciding first whether you will be seen doing it. She looked at Mara steadily. Do you know how rare that is? I don't think about it much, Mara said honestly. No, the sovereign said, that is precisely the point. The star chart on the display panel showed the route they were traveling, the next diplomatic stop, the two after that. Lines between points, distances calculated, decisions already made. Mara looked at it for a moment and thought about the navigation instrument, humming in the dark of the sealed chamber, pointing at its fixed point. I want to tell you about the puzzle keeper, the sovereign said. You don't have to, Mara said. I know, the sovereign said. I want to. Another pause, the careful kind. The list inside it. My oldest told you it was short. Yes. It is. I have been adding to it for 30 years. In those 30 years I have added 7 names. She looked at Mara with an expression that was beyond what any translator and plant could render fully, because it was not a linguistic thing. It was the look of someone who was going to say something true and had decided the saying was worth the wait. I am considering adding an 8th. The ship ran its familiar harmonic. Mara felt it in the chair, in the soles of her boots, in the baseline of her attention, the way she always felt the ship now. The 35 days of listening to it had given her its particular voice, the way months in a garage give you the voice of a settlement. The sounds that mean nothing and the sounds that mean something, and the silence that means you need to listen harder. She thought about Kareth IV, the red dust settling after the storm, the crates outside the garage with no name, the small hands sorting her tools by size. She thought about a broken bird, spread-winged and singing in her hands, and the child who had watched it with an expression her translator couldn't render because it was too close to the thing that needs no language. She thought about the fixed point, the background constant, the thing that doesn't move when everything else does. I'm not a diplomat, she said. I know, the sovereign said. I'm not a politician or an advisor or a strategist. I know that also. I'm someone who fixes things. Yes, the sovereign said, that is precisely what I need. A pause. Not someone who will navigate politics for me. I have diplomats for that. Not someone who will manage fleets or command armies. I have those too. What I need, Mara Voss, what I have been needing for some time, in a way I could not have articulated before my children came back from a desert world with a report about a woman in a garage, is someone who can look at a broken thing, with no agenda and no calculation, and find the fixed point. The quiet between them was not empty. It had the quality of a problem that had been correctly identified and now required only the answer. Tell me what's broken, Mara said. And the sovereign told her. She told her about the 3-generation dispute that had calcified into formal diplomatic hostility between the Velharan sovereignty and the Marin Compact, a dispute that had begun over a trade route and been sustained by accumulated grievances and misread signals, and the institutional memory of slights that were, by now, so layered with interpretation that no one could say with any certainty what the original wound had been. She told her about the years of formal attempts, each one technically correct and functionally useless, because the technicians of diplomacy, like the technicians of the Royal Fleet, were very good at looking for the existing solution and not finding it. She told her about what it cost, in real material terms, in routes blocked and resources unavailable, and people on both sides of the border who would benefit from a thing that the institutions had decided was too complicated to fix. Mara listened the way she listened to machines. She asked her questions at the right moments. She did not offer solutions before she understood the problem, because you never offer solutions before you understand the problem. When the sovereign finished, Mara sat with it for a moment. "You're looking at the thing that moved," she said. The sovereign was quiet. The trade route, the original grievance, whatever it was that started it, everyone keeps looking at that, trying to resolve that, trying to find where the fracture started. She thought of the navigation instrument, the star that had gone variable, the instrument circling endlessly looking for a reference that was no longer reliable. But the instrument isn't broken because of the star. The instrument broke because it lost its fixed point. Find a different fixed point and the instrument works again. "What fixed point?" the sovereign said. "That's what I'd need to understand better," Mara said. "What both sides still share. What hasn't moved. What's been there in the background all along, too subtle to use in fast transit diplomacy, but reliable enough for something that's built for a different purpose." She paused. "Every machine I've ever worked on has something that doesn't move. Something the designers put in at the foundation that everything else is built around. It doesn't go obsolete because it's not built to be current. It's built to be true." The sovereign was looking at her, with an expression that Mara's translator didn't attempt to render. "You understand," the sovereign said, "that this is not a navigation instrument." "No," Mara agreed, "but I understand how to listen to something until I know what it's trying to do, and then I know what it needs." She looked at the star chart on the display. "I'll need to learn more, a lot more. I'll need to talk to people on both sides. I'll make mistakes. I don't know the cultural mechanics of this the way I know engineering. I'll get things wrong." "Yes," the sovereign said. "You will." "But I'll fix them when I do," Mara said. "That's the other thing about fixing things. You're not afraid of the broke. You fix it, and if it breaks again, you fix it again, and each time you understand it a little better." The sovereign looked at her for a long time. "My children said you fix things because it is the correct response to something being broken," the sovereign said. "I think they were right, but I think they said it too simply." She rose, and Mara rose with her, and they stood in the working chamber with the star chart between them and the ship running its deep harmonic through everything. "You fix things because you believe they can be fixed. That is not the same thing. That is rarer." Mara thought about the mechanical bird, dark and bent-winged, placed in her hands by a small alien child on a crate outside a nameless garage in the red dust at the edge of a world no one remembered. She thought about pressing the activation point and hearing it sing. "Yes," she said, "I think I do." She returned to the engineering bay that night. She sat on her stool for a while and didn't work, which was unusual for her. She sat and let the ship's harmonic move through her and thought about fixed points and broken things and the distance between what is and what could be with the right attention and the right hands and the willingness to stay with something until you understand it. Then she took out her tools and got to work. She always got to work. It was, in the end, the most human thing about her. Not the cleverness, not the skill, not the specific knowledge accumulated over years of garages and crawlers and machines of every description. Those things were real. Those things mattered. But underneath them, foundational, the thing that didn't move when everything else did, the willingness. The plain, unremarkable, extraordinary willingness to stay with a broken thing. To not walk away. To hold it in careful hands and find the fixed point and coax it, gently and without drama, back toward whole. The ship moved through the dark between stars, carrying its sovereign and her heirs and its human mechanic and the weight of decisions not yet made toward a future that had not yet been written. Around them the galaxy turned its slow wheel, problems accumulated, things broke, things were fixed, the work continued. It always continued. That was the point.